Is brand strategy bullshit? That is the question Austin, Frankie, and me are trying to answer in this new podcast episode. I'm very excited to be back after a summer break with this first fascinating conversation, and I really hope you enjoy. So buckle up and let's talk branding.
I'm doing good. How are you doing, Steph?
Great. I'm very excited to have you back on the show. I think it's been over a year.
I think it's like
least.
3 years, maybe.
3 years. Wow.
I think so.
3 years. It's a long overdue conversation, but
unless you're talking about our like side show we did for a while, the BS show, then that was I think about a year ago.
Voilà. And you are the BS man, not as in you're selling BS, but you're calling out BS. But maybe before we dive into that, like for the people that don't know you or haven't listened to that episode yet, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Austin Frankie. I am the founder of bullsh, and I'm a recovering brand strategist. Now I have really leaned into distinctive brand assets, which we'll talk about if you're not familiar. You can find me at bullsh.com, and I also write a newsletter at brandingbullshit.com, where I've, at least in the past, historically written a lot about different myths that exist in the brand strategy kind of brand design mix of community there.
What is the biggest myth of them all, Austin? In branding?
Well, I think that, it might be the one that I'm going to talk about today on your show.
All right. Let's just dive into it.
Yeah. So I think, overarching all of the myths that I've just been, uncovering over the last 4 years, I think, is, so I guess maybe I'll start with kind of how I got to the conclusion that I'm at right now. Mm-hmm. I started out as a brand designer that was very insecure about the ability of brand design to help businesses to grow, which I think most brand designers, when they get into the industry, are a little insecure about that. They're not really sure. They love design. They have a passion for it, but they don't necessarily know or believe how it plays into the larger role of business. And so they kind of consume all of the different brand design influencers out there that are not just talking about how to design, but also the strategy of design, how to sell your services as a designer. And I was in that camp. I dove headfirst into all those guys and was convicted. This was great. I bought a brand strategy course and template, and worked with my first not just design client, but strategy and design client. And I just, winged it mostly, using this template and pretended like, I was some expert in all of it, which, I guess I knew more than most about brand strategy if I bought a course, right? So, so I worked with a client, and my first client, she absolutely loved all of the strategy. And I loved doing it. I thought I was really good at it. I think I really excelled in it. And then after that client came like a 6-month drought of clients coming in. And I had the freedom at the time. And also my daughter was just born. So I had a lot of just free time from paternity leave as well. And I just because I was insecure about how brand design plays into the larger role of business, I just started, getting off of YouTube and Instagram and went to my library and looked for some interesting books that maybe had a different perspective. That just led me down a path where I uncovered behavioral economics and started getting really interested in that. And for a while, I was really interested in neuroscience and how that could play into brand design. And then I think it was actually your video. You had a recap of your favorite books or something from ages ago. And I saw that video. I'd listened to your podcast a little bit. I wasn't like a religious listener, but I knew who you were. You were familiar. So I was like, all right, let me give this a shot. And you mentioned how brands grow and building distinctive brand assets. I started with how brands grow, and it played in beautifully with everything I had learned about behavioral economics and behavioral science in general, and how customers actually buy products. It lined up perfectly with Robert Heath's work on advertising psychology that I was really interested in at the time as well. And it just kind of opened up. It was just kind of like the last straw, I guess, that like completely opened up my world and got me rethinking about how I approach design. And then, shortly after, I started branding bullshit.com, where I just enjoyed uncovering these myths in between clients. That, started getting my interest. I started getting really interested in that. And then, as I started knocking down or seeing other people knock down different strategy approaches one by one, I kind of started to realize, okay, well, what does work? And as I also, at the same time, I was getting more interested in proper marketing, Mark Ritson, Byron Sharp, outside of the brand design gurus version of marketing, which I found eventually was very different than most marketing experts and the discipline of, senior marketers. And so I kind of took all of that and just realized, the fickleness of customers. And I had always kind of devalued my ability as a designer as I'm a pixel pusher, right? I'm just pushing around pixels and that's all I am. I really need something to position myself as something better and grander and can charge more for something else. That's where strategy really played its role. But when I started to uncover distinctive brand assets, and not just from Byron Sharp and Ginny Romanak, but started realizing that almost every serious marketer, they might disagree with the distinctiveness versus differentiation debate. None of them disagree about the power of distinctive brand assets. And that was eye-opening for me. I love designing. I just devalued myself as a designer. And so I completely transitioned slowly over the last, 3 years away from strategy and towards design. And so, the myth that I've really recently, almost, in the last couple of months, I've been just excited about, thinking about it, become more and more convicted that brand strategy is often, and I want to distinguish between brand strategy as designers see it and brand strategy as marketers see it, right? So designers usually use brand strategy as a means to design. And they also their clients, have a defined brand strategy moving forward. Obviously, that's a big part of it. But a lot of it is okay, well, how does that inform the design that we're going for based on the strategy that we've identified? In marketing circles, it's very different. In brand design, it's very much this is your brand almost for forever, right? You got to we're going to define it. You're going to keep going down this track for as long as possible. Really lean in hard on this. And in the marketing world, it's let's reevaluate every year or so. And let's look at our brand, Unilever, P&G, they have that conversation every year with all of their brands and decide, okay, what are we going to do with these that might be different than we've done before? How has the market evolved? How has the customer changed? And I think that when designers approach brand strategy, they often box their clients into a particular strategy that will never change. And then when they design based on that strategy, they usually design something that is either really trendy because they're trying to appeal to some, really hip, new generational stereotype, which isn't usually actually representative of the whole generation, but is this stereotype in their minds. And so they'll see what design trends are out there. All right, well, we got to appeal to millennial women with our skincare brand. Well, let's do some boho minimalism, that they really like that, especially white women, so we'll go that route. And then they end up creating this brand that the client is stuck with and that can't really navigate the world. So one, it's trendy, which means that it won't be trendy in 10 years. All design trends that are recent, at least, fade, right? I think, sans serif versus serif, neither of those are ever going to go away, right?
No.
But boho minimalism and psychedelic fonts, which are really big right now, all of that stuff is going to go away. And so there's the trends, but then there's also this meaningful piece behind it as well that creates generic brands, because a strategist will maybe identify an attribute of a skincare brand as, natural or sustainable or whatever. And then they'll design like a leaf logo and they'll use the color green, or they'll use like pastel colors, and they'll really like box their client in to this very specific brand identity that if their client ever evolves beyond millennial white women from this particular era, the brand's not going to work. Right. And so I just started being more and more convicted that brand strategy, more often than not, when I look at the brand design gurus out there, and I look at the brands they've designed, and I'm not going to mention names, but probably the most popular brand design guru in the world, you look at his actual work, it's not distinctive. And that, which we can get into in a second, is really problematic for clients when a brand is not distinctive. So brand strategy often leads to like triggering some gut feeling, but then they don't realize that a bunch of other brands in the category are also trying to trigger that exact same gut feeling. And so now you're left with a brand that looks like everyone else's. I think that's the biggest issue that I have with brand strategy from a design perspective.
Interesting. I mean, there's a million things to unpack here. I think, like, first, to some extent, I agree that I think what kind of happened, and I went to a very similar process as you did, and I talked about this a lot, so not gonna reiterate on it, but like we threw away. I don't know if this is a saying you say in like American in English, but we say we threw away the child with the bathwater.
Right.
Like I think something went wrong. Like the idea of what designers and branding agencies were trying to do was actually good, and I think legitimately the right thing to do. Like, okay, maybe we're not valued enough. Maybe we're not making the right decisions because we don't have the conversations with the right people, etc., etc. So
Yep.
I agree on that level. So, okay, then let's think about being more strategic, using language that marketers understand, blah, blah, blah. That's all good. But then what happened is indeed, like somewhere along the way, we got like so bamboozled with all of these fancy frameworks and like the focus on differentiation that somehow we end up like being overly focused on things like positioning and messaging and like focusing on the why, and then what we linked to that was an undistinctive brand identity, because we thought if our positioning is so powerful, then we can look like whatever people would know because they are attached to a brand. I think that's where like a lot of the things went wrong. It's not that the problem was that designers became more strategic, but it's just that they forgot about the key function of branding, which is distinctiveness, I guess.
Yeah, I think that there's really something to be said. There is a good in that designers have a way to position themselves to charge for what they're actually worth, right? I think, and that gets twisted, right? Again, I was insecure about design's ability to help a brand grow. It's business effects, right? And for those of you who don't know, the Ehrenberg Bass Institute and primarily Ginny Romanek's work, her book Building Distinctive Brand Assets, for the first time, it showed us like proof to some extent. All science isn't necessarily like proof. It's always usually a theory. It's a hypothesis, and some are stronger than others, right? But the closest thing that we have to proof that design on its own can actually drive business results. And with my clients, I've just helped them to see that shift. Most of them don't really come to me for strategy anyway. I'm working with pretty small clients that don't really understand strategy, or they haven't been in that world very long. And for me, it's just really easy to say, like, look, distinctiveness is king. We actually have data to support this. There's always going to be like some inherent strategy. I think I heard Michael Johnson once say that, like, he heard a quote from someone, I can't remember who it was, that like the best designers are inherently strategic. And I think that's very true. There's always going to be like some sort of figuring out that you have to do to design a brand that's going to work for your client. But the big issue is messaging, personality, tone of voice, the why, all of these things can change over time, and they
Mm.
often do for some of the
Yep.
biggest brands in the world. The one thing that cannot change, if you are going to stick with this for the long haul, the one thing that cannot change is your distinctive brand assets. And
Mm.
those, according to Ginny Romanak, are anything that triggers or cues people to recognize your brand. So it can be a character or mascot, it can be a logo, it can be colors, it can be audio assets like jingles, sonic logos, all of these things. Ideally, you can design your distinctive brand assets will be distinctive, and then you can build fame if you have the budget for
Mm.
those assets. But the one thing that cannot change, and this is why Jeannie Romanak would say almost all rebrands are unhelpful and dangerous and risky. Um, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think there's some other things. I think if your brand isn't distinctive or your logo isn't distinctive, it
Mm.
depends. You got to that's where brand strategy really comes in, actually, right? So to me, if you're working with a client to develop a new brand, an identity system that they haven't had before, then like distinctiveness is key. If you're rebranding a company that's been around for a long time and they're really well established, it requires a lot of strategy, but it
Yep.
looks very different than the strategy that designers use, right? The strategy that you need then is to measure your distinctive brand assets, to see which ones are unique and famous in the market, which ones are not, which ones are hurting you, which ones are helping you, which ones aren't doing anything. How can you add something to those? That's where identity design can come in. Or, what design assets did we used to have, or brand assets that we used to have that did really well in the market, and then we got bored with them and abandoned them, and now they don't exist anymore.
Mm.
Or you have an established company that's launching a new product. Well, then you got to think about brand architecture. All right, is this new product going to exist as a house of brands or a branded house, or what's going to happen there? That's where the real strategy comes into play that informs design. There's all kinds of ways that real brand strategy comes into play outside of design. And I am not against that. I'm against the methods that people use, like, brand archetypes, color psychology, unique selling propositions, or onlyness statements, which is just unique selling propositions rebranded. I'm against those ideas and those strategies, but I'm not against using brand strategy outside of design. I think it is fundamental. You cannot survive without it. I want to be really clear. I'm not
Mm.
against all brand strategy. I am just against it for design, and mostly for new brands or brands that have been around a while but don't really have any kind of recognition in the market.
Mm.
Those are the ones that I think brand strategy can either be useless for or even dangerous.
Hmm. Very interesting. I mean, even looking at my own, let's say, if I would pull up decks from now and 5 years ago, 100% those decks 5 years ago would have been fully focused on personality, brand ID, brand
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
essence. Today, they're a hybrid. I don't I do still help a lot of clients with okay, what is our main message gonna be? Also,
mm-hmm,
maybe tonally wise, okay, how do we then say it? There's I think there's value in defining a brand message, a brand voice,
mm-hmm,
but as you say, it's keeping in mind the marketing reality of these things can shift very quickly
mm-hmm,
versus indeed identifying what assets are already working, what need to be scaled up and scaled down, competitive analysis from a
mm-hmm,
visual standpoint, not from
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
a
Yep, yep,
positioning standpoint,
yeah,
because that
exactly.
and then having a nice quadrant where it's they're premium but we're
Right,
accessible and
right,
this is going to
right,
solve our market problems.
right.
That
Yeah.
that's a bit light, and I leaned on that a lot
Mm-hmm,
before, and I don't do that as much anymore today. So I definitely I see your point there, and I think there's this guy from Netherlands. He's called Roel Stavorius or something. I will put his name in the show notes. He wrote this book called Strategic Brand Design. It's unfortunately only in Dutch for now, but actually it's interesting because he says you have to approach brand design strategically, and he talks a lot about the things we've been discussing about distinctive assets, and
Mm.
I think even inherently, if for me, if we accept that branding in its core function is making companies distinctive,
Mm-hmm.
then there is an obvious component to that that is strategic, because you can only
Mm-hmm.
understand distinctiveness in the context where the brand will live,
Right.
aka you have
Exactly.
to do a competitive audit. Like, you
Exactly.
cannot
Yep.
do it otherwise.
Yep. Yep.
That's yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I also, too, I like to differentiate between messaging, too. So I think brand identity design has like morphed into this thing where it's not just distinctive brand assets anymore, right?
It's
It's also messaging.
holistic.
It's
It's
holistic, right? Messaging.
spatial.
Right. Right. And I think that there is definitely a place for brand strategy and messaging. There is definitely a place in brand strategy to an extent for personality. Customers usually don't pick up on it very much, but
No.
there are going to be things that you will do, that you could do with your brand, that would be very out of character for your brand. And you got to
Yeah.
know what those things are going to be.
Mm.
But also, like Paul Feldwick talks about how a lot of brands, some of the greatest, advertising campaigns of all time, went completely the opposite direction of whatever their brand essence or onion or whatever it was had, in favorability of just humor and raw
Yep.
creativity. And some of those campaigns are the most successful of all time because they weren't so glued to this like very specific like approach that they had to take. And then I think, brand strategy, it enters into play into distribution and pricing and promotion, and the 4Ps. Like, brand strategy is intimately involved in all of that. And advertising, brand strategy needs to be intimately involved in that. And identity design, it doesn't. And I think that's where I'm seeing a finer and finer line as I think more about this in terms of brand design. Again, not for rebrands of very established companies,
Yeah.
not for new products of very established companies, but in terms of those brands that are just launching or in the early stages. They picked the logo from Vecteezy or Fiverr for $25, 5 years ago or something, and they haven't really had a brand, and now they need one. That there's a place right there for brand identity design, and I think not as much of a place for brand strategy in those cases.
That's interesting. Like, I'm wondering where the mistake happens, because in some, like, I teach brand strategy, for example, like at a postgraduate here in Belgium, and we're having these discussions, and what I see is, on the one hand, the part about strategy that helps them is it forces them to like go out, look at the competitors, understand the customers, understand the market, basically understand what they're building. Like, so in that sense, and then you can see that reflected in a brand strategy presentation, where basically they're kind of signposting to their client, like, hey, we get you, don't worry, the identity will be fitted to that. But I'm wondering, where do you think it like goes off the tracks? What is that moment in strategy that you lose like the key point, basically?
I think you could do all of the stuff, whether it's proven to work or not, barring some of the strategies like color psychology, which very much works against distinctiveness.
Yeah.
But you could do most brand strategy, you could do most brand strategy workshops as long as you have a very keen eye for distinctiveness.
Yeah.
I think you're going to be like spinning your wheels a lot unnecessarily. I think it's going to be a lot of work for you that like clients don't always even like value that much. Like I have not had problems charging a just wage for the logos alone that I've been designing for clients, if I just explain to them what science says about distinctive brand assets. And I just build that trust in those conversations. And I think, there's obviously some element of getting to know the client and getting to know the market beyond just a visual competitive analysis. If somebody is selling scalpels, right? Their brand is not going to be like jovial and funny and like quirky and and the opposite. Like if you are not a very serious, you're selling a soft drink, you're probably not going to have a very premium, scientific, like medicinal almost approach to that. And I think too, there's some element of getting to know the client and like where they are, where they work best and how they fit in the market best. If their personalities just themselves, like let's say it's a solo entrepreneur and their personality is a particular way, then their brand shouldn't be the opposite, right?
Yeah.
But I think it really doesn't take a strategy workshop to do that. I think it just takes common sense in most cases. Like almost every like insight that I hear about that comes from a design thinking workshop is just like, you can just think of that on your own. Like it's not that complicated, you know? Yeah, I think that where it might go off the rails is just like forgetting about distinctiveness. If you ignore distinctiveness in the mix of all of it, you're going to screw over your client. They're going to love the brand you designed for them because you probably designed a brand that they like visually.
Yeah.
Right? If you are, trying to sell skincare to millennial white women, the founder of that company is probably a millennial white woman. She's going to love boho minimalism. It's going to be like her whole, you go into her house, it's going to be boho minimalism all over the walls, watercolors, jungle plants, all that stuff, right? Little minimalist sayings of just type and descriptions of things, definitions, like all of that, like she's going to love. Right. So the client, and then also you're going to have this intimate relationship that you form, this like bond, right? When you get a lot of times when you get a client into a room to do some kind of workshop, it's the first time that they're actually like letting loose and like, just breathing a little bit and trying something creative for the first time. So you build this like really strong bond with clients. And I think that's where like maybe the most value is for brand strategy workshops. And so at the end of the day, like clients are totally happy with the brand that you just designed for them that's going to screw them over in 5 years. They are totally happy. They love it. Like my first client, like thankfully I learned all of this, like a little bit on the front end. Like I started to get formed just a little bit while I was working with her. And, designed a distinctive brand identity, that was distinctive regardless. And I even designed brands before I knew anything about distinctive brand assets or the importance of distinctiveness. And they were highly distinctive just because I intuited that it was necessary. But like if I would have designed a boho minimalism, brand for, my client who was a white woman in the birth resource world, right? Which everyone uses in that world, then I would have screwed her over. She would have loved working with me. We would have had a great time. We would have been so bonded. I mean, we are friends to this day. And yet, if I did that for her, she'd be screwed. So like at the end of the day, all of that great, that great bond that you can form with a client, if you don't design a distinctive brand identity at the end of the day, then you are doing them a disservice, no matter how happy they are with what you've been doing with them.
Yeah. And something I've seen as well, like what's really interesting to me, because I've shifted a bit from like being first designer, then designer turned strategist, still doing design, to now being more of a marketer in-house for a company. Yeah. And what's interesting to me is like first you need to develop the distinctive assets that you need to have proper marketing, because you can't put any communications or touch points in the market that aren't recognizable. And I think the funny thing is to me that a lot of marketers miss that point, and basically they're running with a brand that is very undistinctive, and they're struggling to be recognized. And like what's interesting to me, I don't know if you have a point of view on this, but like where I also think that the right brand strategy, or even for designers there's an opportunity, is to be thinking a lot more about how it will be put in the market, in marketing, literally. I think that's I don't know how you think about it, but I've been thinking about that a lot. I think there's like a big opportunity there, but also a big gap in the market right now.
Yeah, it's funny. I could have gone a different approach once I started like getting interested in marketing. I could have actually complicated brand design even more. And I think maybe that's why a lot of brand design gurus that teach marketing, I think that's where maybe they go wrong too, is I could have learned all of that in marketing, and then I could have like really tried to think strategically more about brand identity design. But thankfully I came across, distinctive brand assets and the concept of distinctive brand assets. And if it wasn't for that, then I think I would have definitely complicated my process even more. So you can like learn a lot about marketing and actually go in the wrong direction in terms of identity design. So it's not necessarily like, I think every designer needs to have a firm understanding of marketing, but I also think they need to be careful of who they listen to about marketing, because
100%.
brand design guru marketing is not marketing. That's just not what most marketers do. It's just it's so different. Like, most serious marketers, they inherit a brand, or they start working with a brand after they've worked with, a designer turned strategist, and they look at all of the brand onion and the brand essence, and they like take maybe a couple of things that might be helpful, and they just throw the rest of it out because they've seen it before. They've moved past it. They a lot of the like strategy trends in our design community right now have been abandoned by marketers years ago.
Yeah.
And we're just now figuring them out and we're behind the 8 ball on it. I think as an industry.
Yeah, I think that's where the real opportunity is. Like, if you're a good brand designer, able to, design proper. No, I'm not even gonna say brand identity, because I think actually, like, I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, if I would start an agency today, because I had one like 10 years ago with my brother, branding agency, I would probably like position it as some kind of like distinctive brand asset building boutique.
Yep.
Which is something I haven't seen in the market yet. And I think it could be very interesting, because it might be that like a brand comes to you, you audit it, and what comes out of it is like, hey, everything you have is great. We're going to slap a mascot on top of it, because that will help you. And we're going to develop that mascot for you. I think that's like, not a lot of designers look at a brand that way, but there's a lot of opportunity there. I don't know if you've done things where you're like adding or subtracting distinctive assets from existing brands.
Yeah, it's, not much. I'm usually working with companies that are young. I am working with a really established company right now. They're in the like Catholic space. They're probably one of the most recognizable. There's a lot of Catholics that use this brand daily for years.
Okay.
And I haven't run across that, but I did run across this problem where they're launching an app to help with the resource that they provide for the first time. It's their first app, which is like desperately needed. And they went to some like innovation workshop, and they have this name that's very much established in the market. Like, it has huge brand equity behind it. It is the name of the resource. And some like innovation strategist like told them that they needed a different name for their app than for the actual resource. And so they came to me saying like, we have this other name, but now we need a new logo for this name. And in my very first conversation with her, I said, no, you have a lot of brand equity built on this name. You need to lean into that. And she was just like, you know what? I believe that too. Like, why did I change? Why did I think that this other route was the better route just because somebody told me that it was, it's a little different, but in that case, like, I might've gone into it wondering, all right, do you need a new name? Because I also work with clients, to define a name. But the best thing that I could have done as a naming strategist was to tell them, no, use your name. Use your name. Like, what are you doing? Use your name.
I think there's a real like issue there. It's just that like, it's the same, like, let's say you're selling bread, and you're telling people like, don't buy new bread. Like, it's the same with brand designers. Like, they always rebrand because that's what they're offering, and I think exactly. there is value in like being able to have more of like that consultative role where you can step away from it and say like, okay, maybe this is not what you need, but I can help you if we do it that or that way. But it's very hard because you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot a lot of times as well.
I think it's a very interesting contradiction that a lot of brand designers, build their careers on rebrands that are unnecessary. They don't realize they're unnecessary. They're doing it like to screw over the client just to get a paycheck, but I get the temptation, to just say, oh, I could design a whole new brand for, $20,000, or even more, obviously with bigger bigger agencies, why not do it? And I think, I wonder if like the Tropicana rebrand and the Pepsi rebrand, both by the same idiot who like applied all of this ridiculous like philosophy to design. I think like if he would have missed out on, I think it was like $1 million for the Tropicana logo. It might have even been 20 million for Pepsi. I'm not sure how much it was, but that's $21 million. Like where all he had to do was say, don't change anything. It's working. Like $21 million. Like who's going to pay $21 million for that? Don't change anything. It's working. Like I get the temptation. I really do. But at the end of the day, you got to do what's best for the client, whether it's in your best interest or not. And I can't say for sure that some brand design gurus like know. I know that some of them know about distinctive brand assets and never mention them. I know that they've been confronted by people in the past on it. And
what have you been doing, Austin?
And disagreed strongly with it, and then never mentioned it again or never made an actual case against it. In those cases, I do wonder, like, are they just so dug in that they can't see the case for distinctive brand assets and its importance, or do they realize that at the end of the day, distinctive brand assets negate a lot of the brand strategy that these gurus are selling, right? And that's an interesting question that you can never prove. You really don't know. It's impossible to know. And I don't like to assume people know, but some people, some people. I'll say somebody outside of the brand design world, Gary Vee, because everybody can pick on Gary Vee. Like,
that's no problem.
Everybody loves to pick on Gary Vee. Like that guy has been called out for debate by Mark Ritson, I don't know how many times, and he just pretends like Mark Ritson doesn't exist. Like clearly he's just like ignoring actual data that just goes against his theories, right? I think it's pretty evident that Gary Vee is full of shit and knows it. But he
has
find
no
it harder.
incentive to go do that. Like.
Exactly. Yeah. I find it harder for other people, but there's clues. But then there's also brand design gurus who are very well aware of distinctive brand assets. They still believe a lot in the strategies that they used to use, and I think usually they're very well intentioned, right? They believe that they've seen the power of those bonds that you can form with clients. They've seen clients loving it. And if they can do that and they can design distinctive brand identities, I don't have any problem with that.
Yeah.
But if you don't design a distinctive brand identity in favor of all of these strategy workshops, then it's not their fault. They just don't know, right? In most cases, but that's why I'm here, right? I want to try to like spread this message of distinctive brand assets so that clients are getting screwed over.
Yeah. And like, it's two things I want to add to that. Like one, I think in 99% of what I have seen, like I'm talking with young people wanting to learn this strategy stuff. I'm talking to older people that have been around, know all the stuff. In general, it's like, as you say, like people just want to get closer to their clients, want to be valued more, want to get paid more. Like these are all quite normal things to do. But in some cases, like indeed, like you're wondering where you're being on the edge of like, either it's just such a confirmation bias that like you can't get out of it, but it's hard to see. But and the other thing I wanted to mention is I think what we need to do as brand designers, like even if you get into the whole storytelling, brand essence, like go ahead and make up a nice story if that helps you, if that helps the client get on board, because I think that's one thing. Sometimes you need this story to convince internal stakeholders, not the external ones. But at the end of the day, like in the execution, this is where everything either goes like down the drain or is good. And I think that's what we need to keep in mind. No matter how much strategy work we put in and what kind of strategy work we do, if the identity is not distinctive, which is in this case the core function, then it doesn't matter at all. Like it doesn't matter a million years of strategy or 1 minute or no strategy. It doesn't matter. I think that's we just need to keep that in mind, and then we're quite good.
Yeah. And there's so many really talented brand designers that are fully capable of designing distinctive brand identities, and they're leaving it on the table in favor of all of this other stuff. They're being distracted themselves,
I'm wondering, like, and I haven't done this experiment, but like, it would be very interesting to do like a sort of A/B test where you're able to
Hmm.
do a project without any strategy and
Hmm.
with strategy, and then see if the outcome is more distinctive or less distinctive.
We
Obviously,
have
with
it.
huh?
We have it.
Yeah,
Rand Paul, Michael Beirut, Paula
yeah,
Scher, Natasha Jin, right? Like these are people who do not subscribe to all of the brand strategy that our design community subscribes to.
true.
Their brands are very distinctive. They're
Yeah,
iconic. I was watching an interview with Paul Rand the other day where he's on like he's like in the 80s or 90s, and he's on this guy. I can't remember his name, Bugs T or something. It's this weird like hippie dude who's like got him on his show. It's like a public access Cincinnati show or something, and he's trying to like get out of Paul Rand like the deeper meaning behind the IBM logo
mm,
and the NBC logo and all of these others. And he keeps trying, and Paul Rand just says, I had that many lines on the IBM logo because if there were more, it would be harder to see. The what was Westonhouse. I chose the 2 dots above or 3 dots above the W on the Westinghouse logo because just the W isn't distinctive.
yeah,
Like that's all. That's what went into his mind. Right? It was just solving like really simple,
like,
obvious problems.
yeah.
You know.
Well,
Yeah.
like what's really interesting there, and I think that that's where like a lot of the indeed like the storytelling we do for clients is like to
Mm-hmm.
make it palpable for them and to
Mm-hmm.
give them a
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's not a lot of clients that I have seen where you can take the other approach, and you've been doing that, so I'm interested in your take, like where you say like really truly it doesn't matter anything, your name, your logo, they don't need any deeper meaning. They need to be distinctive because X, Y, and Z. It's a much harder path to explain than something that I think feels more like inherent to humans, feels more logical, where it's like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and this ball means our community and this line means
Right. Right.
the thing we're going for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, so I'm wondering, like, first, like, have you, if you are trying to explain this to clients in a more dry like way, if you're doing it, do you get friction, and like how do you handle that?
Yeah, so I would say there's a difference between names and logos
Yep.
for one. So like a name, like if it doesn't have any meaning to the brand at all, then it's like it's going to probably confuse customers a little bit sometimes. Names, I think, can be a different animal, but
Mm-hmm.
you can find what I often do is I'll find a distinctive name that that doesn't have any trademark issues, that has an available domain or at least something close enough,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll like think through, well, that could actually fit retroactively,
Voila, yeah, that's
like
what we do.
yeah, yep,
90% is like
yep, exactly, yeah, 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 and then you get a message from that. So for example, like I when I was working for a client, they were developing a new product that couldn't be under a house of brands because a bunch of other businesses were going to also use it. It was kind of like a side product for what they were doing. It was a kind of an organization product for NetSuite, which is like the back end of a lot of businesses. So it kind of helps you to navigate sales data and different data to make decisions, business decisions. And they had like an AI tool that they were developing. And when I found out that Zookeeper, the name, was available as a trademark, and that zookeeper.ai was available. And the only other like zookeeper.com was like a design agency. So the furthest thing from this that you could think of. It worked beautifully. And then I thought, NetSuite is a zoo. Tame it with Zookeeper. Like
I love that name.
right, right, right. It's a great name, and then you just kind of retroactively like put something to it. Another example was I worked with a remodeling company, and it was under the name of the founder, whose last name translated to perch, as in the fish.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a remodeling company, so like fish remodeling, it's not really much of a connection there. But then I thought, well, perch is a great name, and perch means something else, thankfully, right? It's not just a fish. It's also, where birds spend their time, and at least in bird cages where they live, right?
Yeah. Well,
And so then came like this idea of remodeling, which was like reclaim your perch. You bought this house from someone else, maybe, or you've lived in it, as a kid or something, and you want to make it yours again, or you want to make it different, or you want to make a change, like reclaiming your home with remodeling. It made sense, right? And then, then the visuals come, and then another distinctive asset can be formed of like a door, and inside the doorway is like some clouds, and the door is sitting on the logo, which itself looks like a perch, and is distinctive. Like it all just like kind of comes together in most cases, right? It's like a good designer can just, again, they're inherently strategic, as that quote is, right? So like these things just come, and Paul Feldwick talks about that a lot, where like the greatest ad campaigns came out of necessity, like the Andrex puppy, which I don't really know anything outside of, marketing circles, because they don't have it in the US, but apparently it was going to be a lion or something, and they like couldn't get the lion last minute, so they found a puppy instead. And then they retroactively said puppies are soft. So is toilet paper. Like they didn't even think that through. It's just things like that, or just that's how some of the best brand identities have come about. They haven't come about from all of this ridiculous, So.
It's a lot more alchemic, or do you say that, alchemic, than we make it out to be. It's not like you do the research and this will come out, and because this will come out, you will need this design, and that's the solution. Like it's not like that at all. But we do need storytelling to help clients get on board with distinctive, because being distinctive is often quite a, like, and I don't like to use this word, I'm going to use it anyway. It's a bit brave. I'm puking inside when I say it, but it's a bit brave, because at least like you're not conforming to what is out there. And that's a lot harder than just looking like a very cool, hip brand, but not per se like something else. I think that's very interesting.
And distinctiveness doesn't have to be brave.
No.
Like I think it shouldn't be, in a way, right? I think like the Geico Gecko is not brave. Right? There's nothing brave about the Geico Gecko, and yet it's probably the greatest distinctive brand asset of all time.
Well, when I say brave, I probably I'm thinking more like it takes some like goodwill from the client to say, let's put this weird animal out there, or let's be funny, or let's be a bit different. And in that sense, all right.
But I think you can retroactively say, well, this actually could mean this, and they usually buy it. I've done that a few times. So
I mean, we're running against the 50-minute mark, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. Maybe just to wrap it up, like if you're a brand designer listening to this, and maybe like you're like, wow, this whole strategy thing, I've been looking at it all wrong. Like maybe give some tips at like where to start making that shift again, unlearning or whatever you want to call it.
Right. Well, so my design process goes like this, and you alluded to it already. I get to know the customer, or the client, and the market and the customer. And, in most cases, like just some conversations with your client can get that out of the way, right? You don't need a whole workshop for that. It's usually not that complicated. Often sometimes you're working with a client that's like the NetSuite client that I worked with. I knew nothing about NetSuite going into that conversation. So I had to obviously do research on what is NetSuite to know that, oh my gosh, this is a terrible system that's like cluttered and crowded. And oh gosh, as a designer, I hate it. To know that like Zookeeper makes a lot of sense for this as a name. But also, you don't, like I said earlier, you don't want to be too far out of left field. Some people can like be a luxury brand while like being quirky. I think that can happen if your messaging is on point and your distribution. Like, again, a lot of the things, the gut feelings that designers try to infuse into brand design can be resolved in different ways in distribution, right? If like, your watch brand is kind of goofy and quirky, but it's only sold next to Rolexes, then like, it's going to be pretty obvious this is a premium brand, right? There's so many different ways to do that. So that's what I'm doing. I'm getting to know the client, like, what kind of price point would make sense for them? Like, where are they in the mix? What are they doing maybe that other people aren't doing or aren't able to do? What's like the people that I'm talking to? What's their personality? Just like really general stuff. And then I go in And if it's a character or it's a logo or whatever it is, I go in, I look at all of their direct and indirect competitors, at least the ones I can find. I see, are there any cliches in this industry, like design cliches for logos, like leafs
Yep.
for sustainable brands, whatever. And then I try my best to avoid those. And then the ones that are actually a little bit more distinctive and that aren't an obvious cliche, I put them into Illustrator, and I'm looking at them as I'm designing a logo. I'm just continually checking back in. Okay, does it look anything like this? That M looks a little bit too much like that M. I should probably try something different. And I take a different approach.
I love that.
And I'm just feeling around, until I get to something. With the name, it's the same thing, right? Like, one of my techniques for names is looking at a list of like a dictionary of animals, because there's a lot of animals that are familiar but also distinctive because no one ever talks about them. And I might look at those lists, and then I might find one and then say, oh, does that fit with this client? Not really. I can't really find anything to retroactively put meaning onto it. So maybe I'll find something else, it's just so fluid, and then when you're, showing it to the client, you got to know their taste a little bit, but you also have to be really careful about that because their taste might screw you over, right? If they have a boho minimalist aesthetic taste and they love it, then you gotta say, all right, well, that taste we're not going with, and you gotta explain to them why that doesn't work because everyone's doing it, but I think in general, it's just kind of feeling your way around things and being creative. It's just it's the Paul Rand approach. It's just moving around and playing with things, and play is really important. I'm always just playing with different ideas. And I think that as designers, we need more of that, and less of it's not going to be a good design unless there's really, really strong strategy behind it. And it's just, most of the best assets of all time did not come from that.
Yeah.
In fact, this whole idea of brand strategy to inform identity design is relatively new, last 20 years. Before that, it just wasn't really a thing. Maybe you had some oddballs here and there that did it, but the greatest, it's funny, the greatest design firms, the biggest ones right now that have always been the most historically iconic, now you'll see brand strategy on their websites, but they never did that stuff back in the day.
Yeah.
Pentagram wasn't doing that. Michael Beirut wasn't defining a unique selling proposition when he was designing logos. It's just not how we've ever really worked. And that's actually an asset for designers because you're working with people that know they're not that creative in many cases. They know exactly. Some marketers might be more creative or believe they're more creative, but for the most part, your clients are going to know they're not creative. They're coming to you because you're creative.
Yeah.
That's why they're coming to you, not because you can form a strategy that they can't. In many cases, marketers get pissed off when they go to design agencies because the design agencies are trying to form some strategy that the marketers already know in and out intimately.
Yeah.
And they just want your creativity. That's why they're coming to you. And I think in most cases, the vast majority of cases, clients are coming to you for creativity. They're not coming to you for strategy. You have to sell them on strategy. And that's what usually happens. And, it works in that you can charge more for it. But I think you can also charge, if you help them understand the science of design really well, then you can charge more for good distinctive design as well. And that's what I've been able to do. And it's been working.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Austin, for coming on the show and being so honest about this topic. I think it's something it's under highlighted, and I love that you're bringing this new or old perspective on the table again.
Yeah, it's refreshing when you start thinking about it this way, I think.